I never thought the day my mother's will was read would feel more like a battlefield than a family gathering. We were in the oak-paneled conference room of green, making associates the air thick with the smell of old paper and polished wood. My father sat across from me, his posture rigid, his expression already carved into a sneer, as if daring me to speak. To him, I've always been just a waitress, someone unworthy of a voice, a future, or respect. My brother Logan leaned back beside him, wearing that smug half-smile he'd perfected since high school. When I opened my mouth to speak, my father's voice sliced through the room. "You're just a waitress. Shut up and sit down." I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. Instead, I turned to my mother's lawyer and gave a single deliberate nod. That's when everything began to unravel. I was 28 years old, still living in the same small Colorado town where I was born. Most people I grew up with had moved away college careers, families, but I stayed. Some might say it was out of fear or lack of ambition. My father would tell you it was because I couldn't make it anywhere else. He'd say it with that same condescending smirk he'd worn since I was old enough to understand the meaning of failure. The truth, I liked my life. I worked double shifts at Sonny's Diner, poured coffee for the truckers who passed through, and saved what I could. My world was simple but honest. My customers knew my name. My boss trusted me. But in my father's eyes, none of that mattered. He measured worth by paychecks and titles, things I never had. Then there was Logan, my older brother, the golden boy. Logan moved to Phoenix after college, got into real estate, and never missed a chance to remind me of the expensive condo he owned or the luxury SUV he drove. Every family gathering became a silent contest that I never signed up for, but somehow always lost. Dad's praise for him was loud and generous. For me, if I was lucky, I got a nod. My mother, though she was the balance in all of it. Marion Turner was soft-spoken with hands that smelled faintly of lavender from the soap she loved. She saw me not just the apron in the small apartment above the laundromat, but me. She'd tell me, "Elena, you have more grit than both of them combined." And I'd believe her if only for a moment. Things started to change 2 years ago when Mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. At first, we all thought she'd beat it. She had that kind of quiet strength that made you think nothing could touch her. But the treatments wore her down, and the sparkle in her eyes dulled. Though she never once complained I was there for the chemo sessions, the late-night nausea, the mornings when she couldn't get out of bed. I learned to make her favorite tea just right. The way she said it tasted like home. I sat beside her in the hospital talking about the weather or the silly things customers said at the diner, anything to keep her mind off the pain. Dad came when he could fit it in, always glancing at his watch as though sitting with his dying wife was stealing time from something more important. Logan visited twice, both times snapping photos for Facebook with captions like, "Cherish your loved ones." The comments poured in, calling him a devoted son. But I saw the truth, and so did Mom. One night, when it was just the two of us, she looked at me with eyes that had grown tired but not dim and said, "You'll understand someday why I've made certain arrangements." At the time, I didn't know what she meant, but sitting in that conference room on the day of the will reading, I realized I was about to find out. When Mom's cancer came back after her second round of treatment, it was like watching a slow-moving storm roll across the plains, inevitable, unrelenting, and impossible to stop. The doctors spoke in clinical terms about aggressive recurrence and limited options, but all I heard was a clock ticking louder than it ever had before. I cut my hours at Sonny's Diner so I could be with her more. My savings dwindled, but I didn't care. Every extra minute I could sit by her hospital bed, read to her, or just hold her hand felt like gold slipping through my fingers. Dad still came, but it was all surface-level concern, asking about her medication schedule in front of the nurses, then retreating to the hallway to take calls. His voice was louder there, sharper like the way he talked to contractors or clients. I overheard him one afternoon telling someone, "She's not going to last long. We'll need to get the house appraised." My stomach twisted, but I bit my tongue. Logan was even worse. He breathed in wearing designer sunglasses, carrying overpriced bouquets like they were props. He'd sit on the edge of Mom's bed, lean in for a selfie, and post it online with captions like, "Love you, Mom. Stay strong." The comments were full of heart emojis and praise for his dedication. He never stayed more than 20 minutes. One night, when Logan had just left and Dad was too busy to visit, Mom asked me to close the blinds and sit closer. She spoke in a whisper like she was sharing state secrets. "Elena," she said, her voice fragile but steady, "there are things you don't know about your father and brother." I told her I already knew enough, but she shook her head. "They've been counting the insurance money." She said, her lips tightening like I'm a check waiting to clear. I heard them talking about it last month. The words hit me like a punch. I wanted to storm out and find them, to make them look Mom in the eye and admit it, but she gripped my wrist, stopping me. "No," she said. "You'll have your moment. Just not now." Then she reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a small black USB drive. "This," she said, pressing it into my palm, "is what I want people to hear if they try to silence you." I stared at it, feeling the weight of something far bigger than a piece of plastic. "I've also made changes to my will," she added. "Marion Green has all the documents. She knows what to do. When the time comes, trust her." I didn't fully understand why she was telling me all this, but I nodded. In that moment, her trust in me felt heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. Weeks later, when the call came that she was gone, I knew the storm had finally broken. But what I didn't know was that the real thunder was still ahead, waiting for me in a quiet, wood-paned room with my father across the table. The last month of Mom's life felt like a blur of antiseptic smells, muted hallways, and the steady beep of monitors. Her room was always dim curtains drawn to soften the daylight that seemed too harsh for her fragile eyes. I sat beside her most days reading aloud from her favorite mystery novels, even though I wasn't sure how much she could follow anymore. Dad's visits grew shorter. Sometimes he didn't come at all. When he did, his conversations were clipped, his eyes darting to his watch, like time was money and she was wasting it. Ryder's appearances became so rare that the nurses would ask if I'd heard from him lately. I hadn't, not directly. I saw his posts, though, smiling at charity galas skiing in Sedona, always accompanied by captions about family first. One evening, just after sunset, I came into the room to find Mom sitting up straighter than she had in weeks. She was pale, but her eyes held a spark. She motioned for me to close the door. "Elena," she whispered, "promise me you won't let them write my story." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She reached for my hand. "At the will reading, your father will try to control everything. He'll try to silence you. Don't fight him in the moment. Just do what we planned. Trust Marion and play the recording if you must." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to tell her I'd stand up for her no matter what, but something in her tone told me she already knew that. 2 nights later, she slipped into a coma. I stayed through the night holding her hand and tracing the veins on her skin, like they were maps to places I'd never get to visit again. At dawn, she was gone. The days after felt mechanical arrangements, condolences, the awkward quiet from people who didn't know what to say. Dad barely looked at me. Ryder only texted once, "See you at the reading." I spent the night before the will reading sitting at my kitchen table, the USB drive on the wood in front of me like a loaded weapon. I thought about plugging it into my laptop just to hear what Mom had said, but I didn't. A promise is a promise. When morning came, I put on my plain black dress, tied my hair back, and slid the USB into my purse. Outside, the wind was sharp, the kind that carries dust across the road like a veil. It felt fitting, like the air itself knew a reckoning was coming. By the time I walked into the oak-paneled conference room at Green & Associates, Dad and Logan were already there, seated like kings at the head of the table. Marion sat at the far end, her briefcase closed, hands folded, eyes calm but unreadable. I took the chair opposite my father. He didn't greet me. He just smirked like he already knew the ending to a story I hadn't even begun to tell. Marion cleared her throat, her voice carrying just enough weight to pull the room into silence. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Marion Turner." I folded my hands in my lap, my fingers brushing against the USB in my purse. The weight of it was constant like a heartbeat. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking every bit the man in control. "Let's not drag this out," he said. "We all know what it's going to say." Logan chuckled low and smug. "Yeah, Marion. Skip to the part where Dad and I take care of the estate. No offense, Elena." His eyes lingered on me, sharp with mockery. I didn't answer. My gaze stayed on Marion, who gave me a barely perceptible nod as if reminding me we were still on track. Marion began reading the legal preamble formal language, dates, witness statements. My father drummed his fingers on the armrest, impatient. I could see Ryder scrolling through his phone under the table. When she reached the section about personal statements from the family, I shifted in my seat. "I'd like to say a few words before we continue." The air seemed to freeze. Dad's eyes snapped to me, hard and cold. "No, you're not speaking here." I straightened my back. "It's about Mom." He leaned forward, his voice low but razor sharp. "You're just a waitress. Shut up and sit down." Heat flooded my face, but my voice stayed even. "I have as much right to speak about her as anyone in this room." Logan smirked. "Come on, Elena. Don't make this weird. Let's just finish up. You can write a Facebook post later or something." For a moment I thought about pushing back, about letting years of swallowed words pour out. But then I remembered Mom's voice in that dim hospital room. "Don't fight him in the moment. Just do what we planned." I closed my mouth. My silence seemed to please them. Dad settled back smug again, as if he'd won something. But under the table, I slid my hand to my purse, feeling the edge of the USB. I caught Marion's gaze and gave her the smallest nod. Her lips pressed together, not in disapproval, but in a quiet readiness. She turned the page in her folder and said, "Before we proceed to the distribution of assets, there's an addendum we need to address. One that Mrs. Miller specifically requested be heard aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries." Logan stopped scrolling his phone. Dad's drumming fingers stilled. Marion glanced at me. I reached into my purse and set the USB on the table. Its small black shape seemed to grow heavier with the weight of the room's attention. "This," I said quietly, "is Mom's voice, and she wanted you both to hear it." I pushed the USB toward Marion. She took it without hesitation, sliding it into the small speaker device she'd placed beside her legal folder. The soft click of the port locking in seemed louder than it should have been. The screen on the speaker lit up. Marion pressed play. At first there was only the faint rustle of movement paper, maybe, or fabric. Then my mother's voice filled the room. "This is Marion Turner," she began. Her tone was calm, deliberate, the way she used to speak when she wanted you to really listen. "If you are hearing this, it means I am no longer here to say these words myself." Dad shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. Logan leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "I have spent my life in this family," Mom continued, "loving 2 children and sharing a home with a man I once believed I knew. But in my last year, I learned hard truths about both my husband and my eldest son, Logan." The room was still, except for her voice. "I know you spoke about me as if I were already gone. I know you discussed the insurance payout and how it would be divided. You spoke about it not with grief, but with anticipation." Dad's hand gripped the arm of his chair. "This is out of context," he muttered. Mom's voice didn't pause. "I want everyone here to know that while my daughter Elena may not have the titles or the income you value, she has been my anchor. She was by my side for every treatment, every sleepless night, every moment I needed someone to hold my hand. She is the one I am most proud of." My throat tightened, but I kept my eyes on the table. To my husband and to Logan, she said, her voice cooling like steel, "You will receive nothing from my estate. I have amended my will so that my home, my accounts, and my insurance will go solely to Elena. This is not done in spite, but in justice. You did not value me when I lived. You will not profit from my death." Ryder's face reened. This is ridiculous. Marion held up her hand. Let the statement finish. The recording ended with Mom's voice softening again. Elena, my love, live your life free of their judgment. And remember, if there is another life, I would still choose to be your mother. Silence followed, heavy and thick. When Marion removed the USB, the room felt smaller, as if the walls had moved in. Dad's face was pale. Logan's leg bounced under the table. Neither of them looked at me. Marion set the USB gently on the table between us. Now she said, her voice steady. We will move on to the reading of the revised will. Marion didn't waste time. She adjusted her glasses, opened a slim leather folder, and began to read. This is the last will and testament of Marion Turner, drafted and notarized on the 14th of March in the presence of 2 legal witnesses. Her voice was precise, each syllable a nail in the coffin of my father's confidence. Clause 1. All outstanding debts and medical expenses shall be paid from my estate prior to distribution. Clause 2. My primary residence at 418 on Cedar Ridge, valued at $421, is to be transferred in full ownership to my daughter, Elena Miller. Dad leaned forward abruptly. Hold on, that's the house. Our house. Marion didn't acknowledge him. Clause 3. The contents of all bank accounts held solely in my name, totaling $212,000, will be transferred in full to my daughter, Elena Miller. Ryder's chair screeched against the floor. This is insane. She can't do that. I'm her son, too. Marion's gaze didn't waver. Clause 4. The beneficiary of my life insurance policy in the amount of $1 million has been changed from Thomas Turner to my daughter, Elena Miller. The air seemed to implode. My father's face went red, a vein standing out at his temple. Logan's mouth fell open, then snapped shut as if he couldn't decide whether to scream or swear. Dad finally exploded. This is fraud. She was sick. She didn't know what she was signing. Elena manipulated her. I felt the heat of his words, but kept my hands folded, my voice calm. Everything Mom did was her choice. She knew exactly what she wanted. Lies. Logan spat, pointing at me. You were there every day, whispering in her ear, poisoning her against us. Marion closed the folder, her voice like steel. The will was witnessed by 2 independent parties and notarized. All legal requirements were met. If you wish to contest, you will find it a costly and public process. Mr. Miller. Dad's chair scraped loudly as he shoved it back, standing so fast it nearly toppled. I will drag this through every court in Colorado if I have to. Go ahead, Marion replied evenly. The recording you just heard will be entered as evidence. For the first time, he hesitated. Logan looked between us, his bravado slipping. We deserve something. You can't just cut us out completely. I met his eyes. You already did that yourselves when you treated her like a bank account instead of a person. The room fell into a tense, almost suffocating silence. Outside, I could hear the faint hum of traffic, the distant bark of a dog, mundane sounds that felt out of place in a moment this sharp. Finally, Uncle Grant, Mom's older brother, who had been silent until now, spoke. His voice was low but carried weight. Thomas Ryder, you should be ashamed. Marion was my sister. I saw how Elena took care of her when you wouldn't lift a finger. This will is fair. Dad glared at him. Stay out of it. Grant stood, his chair legs grating across the wood floor. No, I won't. You've been a selfish man for as long as I've known you. And Logan, you've learned all the wrong lessons from your father. If you had any decency, you'd walk out of here quietly and let Elena honor her mother without your bitterness poisoning it. Logan's face flushed deep crimson. This is a joke. He looked at me, eyes narrowed. Enjoy playing queen of the house until the tax bill hits. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say that Mom hadn't already said for me. Dad grabbed his coat, muttering curses under his breath. Logan followed, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass in the conference room windows. When they were gone, it felt as if the pressure in the room finally eased. Marion closed the folder and slid it toward me. "It's done," she said. "Everything is yours now. Marion wanted you to have the security she never did." I knotted my throat tight. She gave me more than security. She gave me her trust. Grant put a hand on my shoulder. "And you honored it today." For a moment, I let myself breathe. I could almost hear Mom's voice in that quiet, steady, warm, and proud, and I realized that this more than the house or the money was the real inheritance she'd left me. When the door slammed behind Dad and Logan, the silence felt heavier than any shouting could have been. I sat there, my hands still on the edge of the table, as if letting go would make the whole moment collapse into some sort of dream. Marion began gathering her papers, methodical and calm, but she glanced at me. "They'll make noise for a while," she said. "Threaten lawsuits, try to intimidate you, but the will is airtight. You're protected." I nodded, though my stomach still churned. "They won't forgive this," Grant gave a low snort. "They don't need to. Let them stew in their own bitterness. Your mother saw who you really are, and that's what matters." As we walked out into the hallway, I caught snippets of hushed voices from the small group of relatives who'd been waiting outside. Some eyes were sympathetic, some curious, and a few looked downright uncomfortable, as if knowing the truth about Dad and Logan had spoiled some long, cherished illusion. "She left everything to Elena," someone whispered. "Well, after what those two did, I don't blame her," another murmured back. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to let their words stick. Outside, the late afternoon light was fading, painting the parking lot in shades of gold and shadow. I could see Dad and Logan in the distance standing by Logan's SUV. Dad's arms flailed as he spoke, Logan's head jerking in quick, sharp movements. They didn't look like a united front anymore. They looked like two men blaming each other for losing. Grant walked me to my car. "Do you want me to follow you home just in case they decide to escalate?" I thought about it, then shook my head. No, they've already lost the only fight that mattered. The rest is just noise. Still, I checked my mirrors all the way back to the house. When I pulled into the driveway, the place felt different. The same porch swing, the same paint peeling near the gutter. But it was mine now. Not because of money, not because of legal documents, but because Mom had wanted me here. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. The scent hit me, first faint lavender, like the soap she loved. I don't know if it was real or if my mind had conjured it, but I breathed it in anyway. I set my purse down on the kitchen table and placed the USB gently beside it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel rich. I just felt steady. Somewhere in the quiet, I thought I could still hear her voice. "Live your life free of their judgment." And for the first time in years, I believed I could. 6 months passed before the constant tension in my shoulders began to ease. The calls from Dad stopped after the second month. His threats of lawsuits dissolved into silence once Marion's letters made it clear he had no case. Logan tried one last jab through a text that read, "Enjoy the house while it lasts." But I didn't answer. I think that stung him more than any fight could have. The house became more than just a place to live. I painted the kitchen walls a warm cream, the way Mom had once said she'd always wanted. I kept the porch swing oiling the chains so it wouldn't squeak in the wind. In the living room, I framed one of the few photos of us together, me in my diner apron, her laughing beside me, holding a mug of coffee, like she was in on some private joke. I still worked at Rosie's Diner. People asked if I planned to quit now that I had money, but the truth was I liked the rhythm of the place. The regulars still came in, still called me Pay, with that same small-town familiarity. If anything, the money gave me the freedom to work because I wanted to, not because I had to. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I'd sit at the kitchen table with the USB drive in my hand. I never played it again. I didn't need to. Every word was etched into me. Her pride, her love, her warning. It was strange having her voice trapped in a tiny piece of plastic, knowing I could hear it anytime I wanted, but choosing to carry it in memory instead. Uncle Grant visited often. We'd sit on the porch with coffee talking about Mom, not the illness or the fights, but the little things. The way she hummed while making pie crust. The way she'd brush her hands on her jeans after gardening. Those were the pieces I wanted to keep polished, not the jagged edges left by Dad and Ryder. One windy afternoon in late autumn, I stood in the backyard, the sky the same pale gray as the day of the will reading. I thought about what Mom had told me. Live your life free of their judgment. Back then, it had sounded like an impossible wish. Now it felt like a quiet truth I'd grown into without realizing. I walked back inside, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. In the hallway, sunlight caught the frame of her photo, and for a second, it felt like she was right there watching, approving, maybe even proud. I smiled, not because I'd won anything, but because I knew I was exactly where she'd wanted me to.